slides up. So let's get started this evening. Lots to cover. So as a reminder, we were talking last time about how good nutrition is so important for supporting a lifetime of good health, really helping the children that we work with to thrive and not just survive. And that's the real difference between preventing deficiency versus supporting optimal health. Of course, preventing deficiency and malnourishment is really important, but also we want to really support every child's ability to really thrive. And that, feeds into how can we support optimal nutrition, getting in the best of the nutrients, not just the minimum. And that takes time, and obviously people are on different levels with their nutrition, but really trying to add in that good stuff so that we can close the nutrition gap as much as possible. As a reminder, there are some well-researched nutritional shortfalls in the UK. The big one that I picked up on last time was 88% of 1.5 to 3-year-olds in the UK don't meet the fibre targets. And there's so many health benefits and research surrounding the importance of fibre. So most children in this country are not eating enough fibre, and that is because of the higher intake of more refined carbohydrates, so your white carbohydrates versus your whole grains, not enough vegetables and fruit, not enough beans and pulses, not enough nuts and seeds and things like that. So just before we start, obviously, if you have any questions from last time, what I'll do, I think I'll move on and then we can ask those at the end. So obviously keep those, to pop in the chat box now, and we'll open up to those at the end. So today I want to just finish off talking about the right fats. We're going to think about 5 a day. Why, how, and what you can do to help support 5 a day. Key nutrients for micronutrients. So the micronutrients are the vitamins and minerals for growing healthy bodies and brains. We'll really start to think about meal ideas, and I really like this idea of adding in. So how can we boost the nutrition value? So, whatever meal is there, like there's always something that we can do to make that food just that little bit more useful, that bit more powerful. Encouraging healthy eating. So how can we communicate with children in a positive way about healthy eating? How do we communicate with their grown-ups? And we'll finish off with that Q&A at the end. And of course, I'm making reference as much as I possibly can, and obviously to the early years foundation stage nutrition guidance. And my training does comply with that guidance. I'll point out to you where I think perhaps that guidance doesn't go far enough, because there are places I think it doesn't perhaps go far enough, particularly, for example, when we're thinking about omega-3 fatty acids, which I'll talk about in a moment. And of course, just as a reminder, the guidance clearly states that you should have regard to this nutrition guidance and follow it unless there is good reason not to. So that doesn't mean that everything has to be perfect, and there is no perfect diet. And you're working with real humans, real little humans who have lots of, different needs, different challenges, different likes, preferences. It's not going to be perfect all the time, and nobody's expecting it to be perfect. It's just about demonstrating that you're doing the best that you possibly can, doing your due diligence to do the best that you absolutely possibly can. And as a reminder, I let you know last week, obviously every body and every brain is biologically unique. You must listen to medical advice for each individual child. I'm giving you general nutrition guidance here, but there are times when that's not relevant for some people. So let's just finish up on healthy fats. We were talking last week about the importance of fats for our brain. The brain is over 60% fat, and every aspect of neurotransmission requires particularly a certain type of fat called omega-3 fat. It needs other fats as well. Actually, cholesterol is really important for our brain as well. Not just those omegas, but particularly those omegas, that DHA fat in particular that we get from oily fish, is really important for our neurotransmission and for our brain. I hear a lot of confusion around omega fats. There's lots of different terms for them. polyunsaturated, long chain, omega-3 essential fatty acids, or essential fats, you might hear. There's different types of omega, but those are some of the terms that you might hear. So they're kind of under the same umbrella. And we need more omega-3 fat. That's the anti-inflammatory fat versus omega-6, which has some health benefit, but we don't want too much of it. So we need those healthy fats, as we talked about last week, for many things, including eye health and balancing inflammation and every single cell membrane in our body. And I think I mentioned last week some of the deficiency signs as well. That chicken skin on the backs of the arm is a really common sign of essential fat deficiency. Now, only about 25% of the UK population eat oily fish. So oily fish is your, think smash, salmon, mackerel, anchovies, sardines, herring, also trout is in there as well, pilchards, of course, which are a type of sardines. And there is some in seafood as well. We'll talk about some of the sources in a second, but only 25% of the UK population eat oily fish, and only 7% of children, 12% of teenagers, 15% of young adults in a research study met oily fish recommendations, which is about 2 fish per week, 1 oily. Survey data showed EPA and DHA intakes were consistently lower than guidelines, with children, teenagers, females and pregnant women having some of the largest diet shortfalls in those two really important fats. Actually, you know, we should potentially be eating oily fish maybe twice a week, and we should be getting other sources of those fats as well. So when it does say in the early years nutrition guidelines, 1 meal should have oily fish at least once every 3 weeks. If you think about, most children in this country don't eat enough oily fish. Most children in this country don't eat plant-based sources of omega-3 like chia seeds, flax seeds and hemp seeds. You can see there's quite a shortfall there, and that's one of the areas I think possibly we could have gone a bit further with the guidelines and tried to encourage a little bit more oily fish. So where do we get omega-3? As I said, SMASH is a really good acronym to remember. Salmon, mackerel, anchovies, sardines and herring. Possibly we should be considering twice a week. I think so many parents and grown-ups don't know this information. Now, of course, some children might be allergic to fish. Some children might not like fish. A lot of families don't cook with fish anymore. You might have plant-based families, obviously, that are not going to have fish. You're not going to be talking to them about having fish. There are some plant-based sources, but these are your best sources of omega-3 because they come ready, packaged up, ready to be utilized by the brain. When we think about plant-based sources like chia seeds, flax seeds, hemp seeds and walnuts, our body has to convert them, and it needs quite a lot of nutrition to be able to do that. So we still might have a shortfall. So oily fish is absolutely going to be the best sources if we can eat it. Now, a lot of people don't like oily fish. I don't know how many of you eat oily fish twice a week. It's kind of got a bit out of fashion, right? I'm seeing some shaking heads there. There are other sources. So we do get a little bit in organic whole dairy. We get a little bit in wild and grass-fed meat, not something that's most families can afford, and a little bit in dark green leafy veg, a little bit in seaweed and algae, but not very much. So there's lots of ways to get those in. We'll talk about in just a moment. Actually, one of the things that I find is so useful is what I make with kids a lot is a fish dip or fish pate, if you like. So if you blend, it works really well with smoked mackerel. I just take the skin off, or obviously for younger children, just be careful with smoked fish because it is higher in sugar, not sugar, salt. Sorry, words getting mixed today, higher in salt. So blend smoked fish, or it could be tin sardines or cooked salmon or something like that with some natural yogurt or some silken tofu for those children that can't have dairy, some herbs, you know, like some parsley or some dill, season it and put a little bit of lemon juice in or lemon zest. It's really nice as a dip. Now, some of you might be turning your noses up at it and going, oh, and I hear you, it's not a food that we eat very much, but you know what? It's one of the most successful recipes I can recommend to you, and I get great feedback from practitioners. Oh my goodness, the children absolutely loved it, and a lot of surprise. So maybe give that one a try. Other ways that you can get it in: fish cakes, so salmon in fish cakes, fish pie, you can put salmon in there. Salmon tagliatelle or sardine pasta works really well. Sardines on toast. lots and lots of ways. You can make your own fish fingers with salmon. Fish cakes really easy to make with mashed potato and some sardines or salmon kind of mixed in there as well. As I said, you can get plant-based omega-3s as well. So on the left there at the top, they are flaxseed. You can grind those up and put them into things like porridge. On the right, you'll see some chia seeds on that porridge. What I would say is don't just sprinkle on the top, though. They should be cooked in. They can upset the tummy a little bit if they're not cooked in. So I would cook them into porridge a little bit or soak them a little bit to make a chia pudding, for example. There's lots of different sources of those seeds that you can get in supermarkets. So you can get ground flaxseed. Obviously, seeds in packets, seeds do not contain nuts. However, they will have a may contain warning on them. So if you do have children that have nut allergies, you might need to be very careful of buying seed packets. There is one brand in the UK called Creative Nature, which is this purpley pink brand up the top here, and they do chia seeds in it's now actually coming in a packet, and they guarantee that there's no cross-contamination with any nuts or sesame seeds. So top 14 allergen free. So if you have children with allergies, or perhaps if you're in a larger setting and you don't know if those children have allergies because they haven't potentially tried those foods yet, that's quite a nice way to add in some omega-3. But this is definitely information that you can send home to parents and grown-ups as well about the importance of omega-3. We also get other healthy fats in olive oil, olives, avocados. Of course, nuts and seeds contain not just omega-3, other healthy fats like monounsaturated fats. And in good quality unprocessed dairy and meat does have some healthy fats in there as well. Generally, we're trying to recommend less use of vegetable and seed oils. I would really recommend as much as you can use olive oil for cooking. Generally, I wouldn't be recommending the use of much margarine. It's a very ultra processed food, and of course anything with trans and hydrogenated fats in it is a more ultra processed food, and you tend to get those kind of fats in baked goods, like you kind of processed baked goods. Eggs also have a really good type of fat in them. The yolk is the fatty bit. That yolk actually, some of the fat in there, it's very, very high in choline. Choline is a nutrient that is very low in our diet these days. We find it in fish and liver, nuts and seeds, and it's so important for the brain. It actually can support healing in the brain. If someone has had a head injury, had a concussion, choline can be incredibly nourishing for the brain. And so eggs really are a superfood for children, and particularly for children's brains. So that's fats finished off there. I'm sure there'll be some questions about omega-3 fats, and I'll pick those up at the end. So let's dive into how to encourage 5 a day. Do you know how many vegetables and fruit we should be eating a day? What is the amount of vegetables versus fruit that we should be eating? Does it matter? There is quite a lot of research around this. Now, 5 a day actually is a minimum. It's not a target. And I'm going to show you a bit of research that demonstrates why. When the 5 a day campaign first came out, actually at a similar time, the Australian government, I think they had a really great campaign, which was 5+2. So 5 vegetables a day, 2 fruit. Now, of course, I would much rather children were eating fruit than not eating fruit, but most children eat way more fruit than they do vegetables. And it's not to say that fruit is bad, but ideally we want to get this vegetable focus, because vegetables are naturally much lower in sugar than fruit. So your ideal is 2 or 3 fruit, 3 to 4 vegetables a day. So actually moving more towards 7. Now, what do we know? Most people, including children in this country, don't get anywhere near that, right? And I think it's really important not to put too much pressure on families as well. If you start changing the message to 7 a day, they're going to really feel, particularly if they have some food insecurity, that they're not giving enough, right? It's always about, let's gradually increase this. But really, we should be aiming for about 7 a day. But if we can get to 5 a day on a consistent basis, that's really, really great. So like I said, 5 a day is a minimum. We are seeing the lowest levels of fruit and veg intake in the UK for a long time. Really nice statistic there. If we increase vegetable intake so that everyone in the UK got 5 a day, that could contribute to 8 months to the UK's average life expectancy. And that's quite remarkable. A very, very simple dietary change. Most of us don't eat enough vegetables, do we? And I'm sure you see in your setting, it's much easier to get children to eat fruit than it is vegetables. What I really like about this concept of 5 a day, and it really does work with my philosophy with food. Like I always think, that we have to really focus on the things that we can add in. Let's really crowd out with the good stuff. And what I would really encourage you to stress to the parents and grown-ups that you work with, and to the children as well, is that every increase in vegetable and fruit a day is worth it. So if you have a person that is very low on their vegetables and fruit intake, and actually what we know is about a quarter of teenagers in this country are eating less than 1 a day, eating no vegetables and fruit, right? If we can increase from 0 to 1 or 1 to 2, so if you just by helping, if the only food that you provide is a snack time, and you can get that child eating 1 more portion of vegetable or fruit a day, it is absolutely worth doing, because what we see in research is that every additional incremental increase in vegetable and fruit up to 10 a day has increases in potential benefit to our health. So it's not you've got to have 5 a day or nothing. It's actually every single increase that you make, which I think is really worth explaining. And that really helps us to feel that, look, I don't have to get it perfectly all the time. And actually, just by doing the best I can and actually looking at meals and saying, okay, what is one thing I could add to give this meal a little bit more usefulness, right? And vegetables and fruit is a great place to start. Absolutely. So if it's a bowl of cereal for breakfast, could you chuck a handful of berries or a chopped apple or a banana, whatever fruit you've got around on it? And then you're already increasing by 1 a day. And you can see from this research here that every additional 200 grams of fruit and vegetables per day is associated with lower risk of quite a lot of health conditions. And those benefits increase up to 800 grams a day, which is 10 a day. And we see links with higher vegetable and fruit intake with things like bone density, weight management, depression, dementia, eye disease, rheumatoid arthritis, pulmonary diseases, so many things. And we know that children are not eating enough vegetables and fruit. The early years guidance is around trying to encourage that we provide at least 1 portion of vegetables and or fruit at each main meal and as part of snacks, not dried fruit as part of snacks, but as part of the main meal. But that dried fruit does count towards 5 a day as well, but just include it within meals so that you're not impacting oral health. So you can see there's a real opportunity to close the nutrition gap. There's a real opportunity to take that child to an increased level of value with their food that has been shown, real strong evidence there to support health benefit. And we know vegetables and fruit are rich in so many things. This is why they're so good for them. So fiber, particularly minerals and vitamins, phytochemicals. So phyto means plant chemicals. So what actually gives fruit a lot of their value, it's not just the fiber and the vitamins and minerals. Look at this picture here. How many different colors can you see? You can see you're almost like getting that rainbow. It's actually all the different pigments in there that create the colors in the vegetables and fruit that also really help to support that nutritional value, which is why herbs and spices have nutritional value as well, because of the different pigments and colors that they have. Just to say as well, we've got lovely slow releasing carbohydrate in there and lots of fluids. If you have a child that struggles to drink enough, we will get fluids in vegetables and fruit. It's an important part of our fluid intake as well. Also, just to say, people often ask me, is frozen better than fresh? Well, actually, frozen, not only budget friendly, particularly for things like berries during the winter, much cheaper, better for the environment. Often they are more picked in the summer, more in Europe and locally, and not hopefully flown halfway around the world. But actually, when they're frozen, they tend to be frozen, pretty much as soon as they're picked, and that might help to lock in some of the nutrition as well. But really trying to think about variety and colour if you can. Look, if a child will only eat 3 or 4 different ones, I'd much rather they were eating those 3 or 4 ones consistently. But actually, you'd be really surprised with children how few of them have eaten things that you might think is quite common to be eating. Actually, the amount of children that have never tried a corn on the cob or eaten a kiwi or seen look at that picture, a purple carrot, for example, or different colors of peppers, different sizes of orange. It might feel very normal to you and something you do a lot, but a lot of children just don't have access to that rainbow of vegetables and fruit. And that's a really lovely way to explore the rainbow, explore different food experiences and sensations with children. So I really encourage this idea of eating a rainbow. And this is a nice activity that you can get children to do with their families, or you can do it within setting. The idea being that every family member is trying to eat every colour of the rainbow most days. And you can give lots of ideas on how to do that. So we'll go through some ideas in a moment. Just to clarify, a portion of fruit and veg, use child's hand as a marker. Yeah, so for a 1 to 4 year old, it's about 1/2 to 1 tablespoon of frozen veg, for example, 1 small satsuma, 1 small kiwi. Lots of different portion sizes I've put on there, but think about fist of the hand. That's the easiest way to think about what a portion is. So really coming back to that idea of what can I add in? These are lovely pictures. You might print off some pictures like this to show children, and actually try to identify different vegetables and fruit. Because as I said, a lot of children won't know what some of these things are. Maybe you don't know what all those things are as well. And actually, there's a couple of things on there I don't know what they are as well. I think they're cranberries in the middle there, those red ones. That's very topical, isn't it, with Christmas being around the corner. So some ideas on getting in more vegetables and fruit. So we've talked about fresh versus frozen. Tinder's fine as long as it's not in syrup and should be in the natural juice, not from concentrate, not really giving fresh juice or any kinds of juices at all, and trying to include as much variety as you possibly can. So chopping up vegetables and fruit into sticks is really nice. Obviously, be really careful of age appropriateness and choking risk. For younger children, you could have some steamed vegetables, for example, steamed carrots, sticks of sweet potato, that kind of thing. You can make these fruit and veg kebabs. These go really nicely, with children that have the dexterity to be able to do that. Be careful of the points. They are very, very sharp. You might just want to break the very end off for children, obviously just assess the age appropriateness, but that's really nice, and they can dip those into yogurt, and that gives children then the control to be able to put what they want on their fruit kebabs. They could dip fruit into yogurt. You could offer baby versions of like cherry tomatoes chopped up or baby sweet corn. You could make a fruit salad. You can use vegetables and fruit in baking, things like carrot cake, beetroot brownies, courgette, that kind of thing. Courgette cake, really, really nice way to get them in. Try not to make your veg all soggy. No one likes really soggy veg, apart from some children like it blended in and very soft, obviously, but just, cater to the taste of the children that you have where you can, but perhaps not make it super soggy. I'd also really recommend trying to hide veg into sauces as much as you possibly can. Given that we know that most children don't eat enough vegetables. My children would tell you that they hate courgettes, but they've eaten courgettes probably about 3 times a week for most of their life. They're such a great one. I tend to grate them on a like a Parmesan grater, like on a fine lemon zester, because they just melt into sauces like that. And often what I'll do is I will prep in advance, and this is a good tip if you do cook food in your setting, is to prep lots of food, lots of vegetables like that in advance. You could use a blender or something like that. You could do onions, garlic, celery, leeks, carrots, peppers, courgette, and just blitz them up into really small pieces. Don't make a smoothie, just like get them into really small pieces. And you could then freeze them. So I tend to use those little silicone muffin trays and freeze them in silicone muffin trays. And then once they're frozen, pop them out and put them in a bag. And then I know that when I'm cooking, I can just grab a handful and pop those into dishes. Great, great way to increase the vegetable content. You can freeze fruit. So particularly bananas, if they're going off, don't waste them. Just peel them, chop them up, chuck them in a bag or a Tupperware. They're brilliant for putting into a banana bread. You could use them if you blitz them with just a dash of milk. You can get instant ice cream. It's really, really delicious. You need a powerful blender like a NutriBullet to do that. You could make them into ice lollies, just blitz them with a bit of yogurt and make them into ice lollies for the summer. Yeah, you can make some smoothies. Again, just don't overdo the fruit in smoothies. A lot of concern around smoothies. I think the thing is, obviously, we're not buying innocent smoothies, those kind of things that have about 6 or 7 portions of fruit in. I'm talking about having a smoothie with, child-sized portion of fruit with some milk or yogurt, and possibly, you could put some oats in there or something like that to make it a little bit more thick. Perhaps might be something to have alongside breakfast, for example. And really encouraging children to think about what is one more vegetable or fruit or an extra colour that they could put on their meal. You might think about that second dish, that's an opportunity to get more vegetables in, of course, and actually getting children to fill up on that first. You get the vegetables in first. You can grate fruit into things like porridge on top of cereal, blend it into plain yogurt, even toast. Look, like the picture there, just start putting different toppings on things. Put plates of chopped veg next to children while they're doing something else. Again, be careful of choking risk, but it's a great way to encourage just having more vegetables. Stewed fruit, baked apples have gone a bit out of fashion. Do you know they're one of the best foods for our gut microbiome? Really easy, lovely kind of second dish, which you could have with some yogurt or some kind of blended up oats and maybe some seeds or something like that. You can make a little crumble and just make it really normal to have at least 2, possibly 3 vegetables or some salad on the side of each meal. And whilst they don't count as a full portion of vegetables and fruit, herbs and spices do have a lot of nutritional value, and it's also really good to get children used to those stronger tastes. They have these phytochemicals in, they have a lot of anti-inflammatory benefits, things like cumin and turmeric. They don't have to be super spicy. It's really nice to get children used to different flavors and not just that bland taste. Rosemary's fantastic for the brain. It's got known to have quite a lot of cognitive health benefits. Parsley, adding in lots of parsley to food. Parsley is really high in iron and calcium, so you can use quite a big large handful of parsley and chop it up and kind of sprinkle in or stir it into soups and different foods as well. So a couple of resources that I mentioned earlier, they're really, really nice for supporting this idea of getting in more colour and eating a rainbow. So I'm just going to sip of my water. I'm going to dive into vitamins and minerals now. Now, I'm not going to just sit here and say, this is iron and this is where you get it and this is why we need it, because you can look up this information in a book, right? I don't want it to be boring and dry for you. But what I have done is just picked out a couple of key points and a couple of nutrients that I think are really important for us to prioritize. So, really important to remember is that nutrients work in synergy. They work together, particularly your micronutrients. So micro means small. That's your vitamins and minerals, and they tend to be measured in milligrams or micrograms, and they do work together. For example, we need vitamin C to absorb iron. We need magnesium and vitamin D to absorb calcium. We need vitamin D to absorb iron. When I work with women who've got low iron, so often their vitamin D levels aren't tested, and we can't absorb iron particularly well if we don't have optimal levels of vitamin D. It's something that really gets overlooked. Too much zinc or lower copper and vice versa. So what I'm telling you by this is just to understand that, dietary diversity again is key. And I know that's hard with some children's diet because, children tend to like the same foods, don't they? But the more diversity we can get into the diets of the young children that we are working with, absolutely the better. Yeah, so sneak it in when you can, educate children around diversity, encouraging them to add just one more and encouraging them to be around different foods, really emphasizing you don't have to try it, you don't have to like it if you do try it, but just keep encouraging them to be around different foods, because particularly when you've got more restrictive eaters, obviously, if you've got a very entrenched restrictive eating problem like ARFID, you do need to be careful encouraging for children to eat other foods. But where you've got, I'm kind of maybe talking more about just your children that are just challenged by foods, and it's not been, going on for a long time. The more we take different foods away from them, the more actually that can heighten that disgust response. Actually, it's a really good idea to encourage children to be around lots of different foods, and even if they don't want to taste them, and like I said, they don't have to like them, just really encouraging them to be around it. So we're going to talk a little bit about calcium. Obviously, that's one of the reasons that dairy is such an important food group, although there are so many non-dairy sources of calcium, of course. But just a couple of things to point out here. So when we're talking about bone density, we're talking about the strength of your bones. So here's a little diagram that I've got here, and it's talking about how our bones over our lifetime, the density, the strength of our bones increases in the early years. So you can see for women and men, we reach our peak bone density actually around the age of 30. So we've got those first 30 years of building up the strength of our bones, right? And then for women, you can see that we get a much sharper decline, and that is because of menopause. As our hormones shift, we get this much sharper decline. So when we're thinking about bone health for children and bone strength, you can see that actually the health of their bones later in life really depends on those first 30 years, and including those first years of childhood. And if a child does not reach peak bone density at age 30, so if they haven't had the right nutrients to build peak bone density, so this is as strong as you want your bones to be, and they're hitting 30 somewhere down here, you can see that as their bone density starts to come down, they're starting on a much lower footing, right? So you then really looking at that impact later on in life. And so the problem with not having strong bone density is you are much more at risk of osteoporosis when you get older. And unfortunately, if you have a higher risk of fractures and you've got osteoporosis when you're older, that can impact your longevity as well, because when we get to our 70s and 80s and beyond, breaking a bone can be life-threatening because we're not so good at healing. So we really want those strong bones. So a really important factor in supporting strong bones is calcium. It's not the only factor. Movement and exercise is really key. Absolutely vital that we get enough movement on a regular basis and that we continue that movement throughout our life. We need to put shock through our bones. Do this basically with our bones, so jumping up and down, that kind of thing. You're actually feeling shock in our bones to be able to keep our bone density. That's why swimming is really good exercise, but it's not good for your bone density because you don't put any weight through your bones. And as children are growing, they need to be jumping and bouncing and running around and on their feet and not be sitting constantly gaming and you know, not doing any exercise. So calcium is really important for building those strong bones, and dairy is one of our most important sources. So that's things like milk, cheese, yogurt, yeah, and that's why it's stressed so much in the nutrition guidelines. But I really want to point out to you that there are many non-dairy sources, and this is particularly important when you have children with milk allergies that can't have dairy. Yes, dairy-free sources, they are fortified, but they're often fortified with the cheapest form of calcium, which is calcium carbonate, which is chalk, which isn't the most absorbable form of calcium. So I really feel like we shouldn't be relying on those fortified non-dairy options for calcium, and we really need to emphasize getting in some non-dairy optimal sources of calcium. So dark green leafy veg, things like kale, broccoli, cabbage, sprouts, those kind of things, really important. Nuts and seeds, particularly sesame seeds, and of course they are potential allergens. If you're in a smaller setting and you know your children are not allergic to those things, you might be okay to have them in your setting. But this is about communicating with home that those are really important for strong bones, particularly in children that can't eat dairy. Oranges, fresh figs, baked potatoes, hummus, baked beans, chickpeas, pulses, tinned sardines. Obviously be careful of those little bones, but you find in tinned sardines that those bones mashed down, they are a fantastic source of calcium. Dried fruit, not too much. As I mentioned, parsley is also a great source of calcium. So getting in lots of different calcium sources on a daily basis. Dairy, yes, but some of those other ones as well is important. And there's so many other nutrients we need for strong bones. Vitamin D, vitamin K, magnesium. So vitamin D particularly we get from the sunshine. Let's move on to zinc. Actually, nuts and seeds, one of the greatest sources of zinc, but there's many other sources as well. It's one of the most common deficiencies that we see. As we know, 21% of 4-year-olds, insufficient intake. Deficiencies linked to hyperactivity, anxiety, depression, may even be linked to eating disorders. We see a lot of ADHDers potentially low in zinc. So signs that we might see: stretch marks. Obviously, it's normal to get stretch marks. If there's excessive amounts of stretch marks, that can be a sign of zinc deficiency. Teenage acne can be a sign of zinc deficiency. White spots on many fingernails. It's not normal again to have 1 or 2 spots because when we bang our nails, but if you've got lots of white spots on lots of your fingernails, that can be a sign of zinc deficiency. Tummy troubles and loose bowels also can point to zinc. We need zinc for a lot of our digestive enzymes and digestive health. Poor immune strength, poor appetite or sense of smell. This is one of the things I talk about a lot with restrictive eaters. Zinc deficiency might not be the cause of it, but it's certainly going to exacerbate it, because when you're deficient in zinc, it can really impact not only your appetite, food and how you smell it. So things can feel strange, can really exacerbate those sensory challenges around food. Slow growth, failure to thrive. That's why you see a lot of zinc deficiency in celiac, children with celiac disease, because it impacts the absorption of key minerals, particularly zinc. And hyperactivity, we need zinc to be able to not only make and respond to dopamine, so we need it for that response to it as well. So we've mentioned zinc. I said nuts and seeds, but also meat is a really good source of zinc, especially red meat, fish and shellfish, dairy and eggs, whole grains, wheat germs, seeds of any kind, especially pumpkin seeds, nuts, mushrooms, beans, legumes, dried fruit. Tends to be lower on a vegan and vegetarian diet, just bear that in mind. We need zinc for growth. So often you tend to see, so when I work with ADHDers, we often see after a growth spurt that behaviour can be exacerbated, and growth takes a lot of zinc. And bear in mind what I was just talking to you about, in that we need zinc to make dopamine. So sometimes when you see children going through these growth spurts, particularly teenage boys, when they have these massive growth spurts, you can definitely see an exacerbation of potentially ADHD type symptoms in children that are predisposed, that's the word I'm looking for, to it. You might see a flare up of acne if that's something that they're experiencing, for example. Magnesium, another really key important nutrient, again one of the most common mineral deficiencies. There is evidence to suggest that over 90% of those with ADHD need more magnesium. If you are someone who jiggles their leg constantly, which we often see with ADHDers, but not necessarily, it's not a sign of ADHD, but can be a sign of magnesium deficiency. That jiggly restless legs can be due to other things, of course, as well. My husband, I always know when he hasn't taken his magnesium because his legs starts jiggling again. So if you're someone who experiences restless legs, it's one to look out for, and really important for kind of fidgety, restless children, those that can't sit still. My son, he gets the zoomies. He's got ADHD traits, and I know when he's not taking his magnesium as well. Key function of magnesium, nervous system regulation. So it's often really depleted by stress. Bowel movement, so it's really important for muscle movement. So in terms of kind of moving that poo through the digestive tract, we need good levels of magnesium for our muscles to work well. For the immune system, for sleep, energy, blood sugar control. So deficiency signs, tics actually is a really common one. Obviously, I'm not saying deficiency in magnesium causes tics. It's potentially going to exacerbate an underlying predisposition. Same with anxiety, restless legs, constipation, muscle aches, hyperactivity, being very hangry before meals, those little eye twitches that you sometimes get. Again, there's many reasons why those things can happen, but that can point to a deficiency of magnesium. So there's lots of really good sources. Dark green leafy veg. If you're kind of a bit lost as to like which food contains what, dark green leafy veg is kind of an answer to so many nutrients. It's one of those superfoods, particularly broccoli. It has so many nutrients in it. So if you're not sure, it's always a good bet to try and be supporting green leafy veg intake. Nuts and seeds, fish, seafood, whole grains, avocado, beans, lentils, bananas, dried fruit. Actually, cacao and dark chocolate is a really good source of magnesium, iron, copper as well. Obviously, we don't want to be giving too much to young children because it does have some stimulants in it. But you know, putting a little bit of cocoa powder into a porridge, for example, for children, it can really help to raise the nutritional value. I'm not talking about hot chocolate, I'm talking about proper kind of dark cacao. And actually, one of the ways that we absorb magnesium, we can absorb magnesium really well through our skin. So putting things like Epsom salts in the bath can be really helpful, or you can get pure magnesium salts that can go in a bath. There's some really nice ones that are suitable for children. There's a brand called Better You. They do really lovely magnesium salt baths that can be put into the bath. So a really nice way to get magnesium in. So that's what I'm going to cover on nutrients, and I'd just like to go through now some boosted meal ideas for the last sort of 15 minutes that we have today. And I thought I'd start with breakfast. Breakfast is really important. You know, I always explain to children, it's about how we power up for the day. You know, it's that energy boost for body and brain. Would you get to nursery, or would you get here without fuel in your car? Absolutely not, you know. And so the same with our bodies, we need to fuel our bodies in the morning. And I always recommend trying to get a bit of protein with breakfast, and it is a nutrient that is often so missed in breakfast, but it's really important for that, keeping that blood sugar levels balanced, giving us sustainable energy throughout the day. Really important for how we make neurotransmitters, things like that dopamine and GABA, which is like our off switch. You know, perhaps for those that say they don't want to eat breakfast, don't like eating breakfast, bear in mind, you know, if a child is anxious about being in setting, anxiety can impact their appetite. Maybe they need to have something a little bit later. Maybe they need to start with something very small initially. Breakfast doesn't have to be a big, massive meal, and it doesn't suit everyone to eat, you know, lots for breakfast. Encourage some fluids, particularly with breakfast. You know, making sure that we hydrate is also really important. So you'll see with these meal ideas, it's just about trying to boost the nutritional value. Like, how can we make these our typical breakfast just that little bit more powerful for our day, you know? And I think, again, parents and grown-ups often don't realise that we can just add so much more nutrition in a very simple way. The toast at the top there is a classic example, right? You know, classic toast. What could you add? A bit of fruit or a bit of egg on there, right? Bottom right there, you've got French toast. It's got some yogurt and some blueberries on top. We're always just trying to come up with these ideas of what could I add. So if it's a bit of toast or a crumpet, you know, you could put some fruits and vegetables, some extra protein on top. If you're giving porridge rather than just oats and milk, what else could go in there? Some banana, some ground cinnamon, some cocoa powder, some raisins, some chopped dates, some plain live yogurt you could pop on afterwards, eggs, ground seeds, nut butter perhaps when they're at home. And I like the idea of boosting meals like that, because you actually can really give control back to children that might really benefit from that, like putting some little toppings out and allowing children to add what they want, and encouraging this idea of what can we add just to make this a little bit more powerful, a little bit more useful. Again, the same with cereal, trying to swap to whole grains where you can, things like shredded wheat, Weetabix, and again, what are those nutritionally valuable toppings that you might want to put on, similar to what I mentioned about with the porridge. You could, if you have time, make breakfast muffins. You could do baked porridge. You could make pancakes on some days. You could sometimes make some smoothies. You don't want a big glass of smoothie, just a little bit, you know, but that can be a way to just add a little bit of extra fruit or a little bit of extra yogurt or milk or something like that. Snacks, lots of ideas here for snacks. Again, I will share these slides with Fliss to make sure these are sent out for you. You're very welcome to take a screenshot. I don't mind if you get your phone out and take a picture, or screenshot if you're on your phone. Here's some ideas. So apple slices and cubes of cheese. Again, just to say, obviously make them age appropriate. Be careful of choking risk, of course. But some ideas, you know, it might be dips and sticks, stewed apples or berries and plain yogurt. Homemade soup is a great snack. Homemade homemade flapjack, homemade muffin, piece of fruit, you know, which you could have with some yogurt. Lots and lots of ideas that you could have. A little pitta strips are really nice. You could dip those into some mashed avocado or a herby yogurt dip, or make some hummus. And bear in mind, most hummus that you shop by will have sesame seeds in it because it's got tahini in it, but it's very easy to make your own and much cheaper. Actually, just all you need is a tin of chickpeas or any beans or pulses, a dash of olive oil, probably 1 or 2 tablespoons per tin. I keep a little bit of the liquid that comes out of the tin and just pop that in to loosen it up a little bit. You could add a little bit of pepper, you could add a little bit of lemon juice, you could add a bit of garlic if you want, but you might not want to make it too strong. Great way to use up some leftover vegetables. If you've got some leftover beetroot, you could make pink hummus, or if you've got some leftover sweet potato, you could make orange hummus. It's a nice way for using leftovers up. Some nutritious lunchbox ideas here. So it doesn't always have to be a sandwich, but if it is a sandwich, encouraging parents, if they're making lunch boxes, to put some kind of vegetables in there. It could be grated carrot, works really well. Chopped baby leaf spinach, which is a great source of iron. You know, lots and lots of opportunities of things that you could put into a sandwich. Maybe that you might encourage sometimes some wraps or some pittas. Pittas are so cheap, and wholemeal pittas really often less processed than bread. You might do crackers, you might do a kind of bento style box with different things in. You might have pasta and some kind of protein. Just really encouraging a little bit of protein in there, just to try and get that kind of balance in there, trying to get that blood sugar nice and balanced. Include at least 1 veg and 1 fruit. Can be more, but at least 1 veg and 1 fruit. Maybe there's a little bit of protein for snack time if you want them to bring in some snacks. Maybe there's a healthier sweet treat, but it might be something like some seeds, raisins, and a few dark chocolate drops, or it might be a homemade piece of flapjack or a plain piece of sponge, for example. You know, lots of options of things there that could be used, or it might be a plain digestive biscuit or something like that. Yeah, and all that needs to be brought in actually is water. They don't really need to bring in squash now, don't really need to bring in diluted juice. I would say the only time that I would be giving anything aside from water would be if that child really refuses water. So those, if it is squash, it should be very weak. If it's diluted, if it's juice, it should be very diluted, but really we should be bringing just water. So some of the lunch boxes I used to make for my children when they were at primary school, just to give you a few ideas. You can get these bento boxes really cheaply. They're a great way to put different things in. That brand actually there of yogurts, they do these little pouches of yogurts. They also do little pots of yogurts, and they're much lower in sugar than things like the Petit Filous and the Onken type yogurts and that kind of thing. Obviously now we're trying to move more to plain yogurts. That's going to be challenging for you in lunch boxes, of course. But yeah, just some ideas of different things that you can have a look at. Those boxes at the top right, they're just the Systema lunch boxes. They're about £6–7 in most supermarkets, so they're not kind of super expensive. And then finally, let's just finish off by talking a little bit about how to support difficult eaters. This is one of my specialist areas. It's an area I talk a lot about. I know how challenging it is for you practitioners, particularly when you're trying to support the needs of lots and lots of different children. It's frustrating, isn't it, when you've spent a lot of time cooking a really nutritious meal and it's just pushed away. I would say to you that consistency, don't give up with nutrition. Sometimes you have to think outside the box. But, you know, if you can encourage the children that you work with to broaden the variety that they eat, you'll be doing them such a support for their future health, really helping to support their the amount of nutrition that they get in at such a critical age in their life. Of course, if you can capture children that eat a lot with you from a weaning stage and get them used to those stronger flavors when they start weaning, you'll find it much easier as they come through the years with you, obviously, and coming onto that nutritious food. When it is more difficult is when you've got a child that you perhaps capture at 3 years old, who has very kind of beige, bland taste, then it can take obviously a lot more effort to get some change in there. sometimes it's so surprising what children like. Be really open-minded about what you think a child will like, because sometimes children really like strong flavors. It's really interesting one actually with neurodivergent children. Often they like the strongest of flavors and don't like the kind of more bland flavors. Particularly you see that with autistic children, not always, but you commonly do. So just try to keep really open-minded about what a child potentially will and won't eat. But it is really normal to go through phases with our food and to have some things that we don't like. So I always try to, I think particularly in this age group, unless you have a child that is diagnosed with something like ARFID, avoidant restrictive food intake disorder, which is a diagnosed eating disorder that can be diagnosed from around age 2. So we're talking about very entrenched, often sensory based eating challenges. You might see a child that's eating maybe 5, 10, 15 foods. For most children, you're going to be fine to be working on empowering them to make the right food choices, healthier food choices, supporting family to help them make better food choices, alongside trying to sneak in some of the good stuff as well. So I always say lead by example. What's your diet like? You know, I'm sure this is something you hear about in so much of your work, but actually if children can see you eating those healthy foods, is a really, really good way for them to learn that, you know, children learn that something is safe by seeing grown-ups do it. Yeah, that's how they learn about safe foods, because, you know, children naturally have this disgust response. They naturally have this neophobic response, which is being frightened of new things, being frightened of strong tastes, because ancestrally, when we were in caves, it would have probably saved their lives. You know, they don't want to be picking up things that are going to poison them and they're going to die from, right? So, you know, there is this natural disgust response to quite bitter flavors. Of course, breast milk is quite sweet, isn't it? So you have to get children used to those bitter flavors, and they will learn what is safe by seeing what adults and older and other children do. It takes patience, but graduated exposure techniques can really help. So just continually encouraging children, you know, with other offerings. You know, if you have George and you only give George the foods that George likes, George is only ever going to eat those foods, right? And that can entrench the disgust response further. It's really important, and that might start with messy play with other foods. For example, we use lots of our senses with foods. That might start with just you know, picking and agreeing with grown-ups that you're going to start with 2 or 3 or 4 different foods that you continually offer, and encouraging grown-ups to keep that going at home as well. You might start those on a separate plate, for example. We do eat with our eyes, so trying to keep kind of, you know, more nourishing foods in sight. You know, so things like having a fruit bowl around and, you know, giving children choice within that healthy range can be helpful. Avoid the use of unhealthy snacks, and I know that you guys do this anyway. It's hard, isn't it, when we're talking to parents, but we don't really want to, you know, be having these foods on a daily basis. It's really challenging, isn't it? You know, but they're hyper palatable. Ultra processed foods are hyper palatable, so maybe you might start to talk to children and their grown-ups about occasional foods and fun foods versus nourishing foods versus powerful foods, useful foods. It's not to say that we're never going to have fun and occasional foods, but they're not foods that we generally have on a, you know, on a daily basis. It has become so normal, hasn't it, though, for grown-ups to pick up their children and give them a little bag of Haribo, right? It's become such a kind of entrenched part of our society. I'm nearly 50. That didn't happen when I was at school. I don't know if you remember that ever happening. You know, if you're in my age range, you know, it has really changed, shifted in terms of how we think about sweet things. I would really just make it really normal that every meal has some veg or some salad and or fruit with it. Of course, use fruit for desserts, and try to empower children to be part of the process in planning and preparing meals. You know, that really helps them feel that they've got some autonomy with their food and agency, and, you know, feeling like they have some control. One of the biggest tips I give parents and grown-ups is to try to take all emotion out of eating. So to make it really normal to eat useful or powerful foods. So of course, it's very unlikely that there would be negative comments, although watch out for comments like, I've got some teenagers I'm working with at the moment with ARFID, and they have expressed to me, oh gosh, it's so hard when my grown-up says to me things like, well, when I was a child, we didn't have any choice and we just had to eat it. You know, they're quite shameful comments, aren't they? We don't mean it with it. We're trying to, with our heart, express to them they've just got to eat. And of course, with younger children, you know, they're not going to be able to express how difficult that is. But, you know, once you get to a child in their teens who has very restrictive eating, they feel there's a lot of shame around it. There's a lot of shame around it for them and their grown-ups. And so just really trying to avoid any negative comments, even if they're well-meaning. Try to avoid labeling children as fussy or picky eaters. And the other thing I would really say would be helpful is try to encourage parents not to overpraise around food, and also yourself and any colleagues that you have. Great, that's brilliant. You ate that piece of broccoli. Actually, like, don't overpraise, just make it really normal. You know, sometimes when we draw attention, particularly if there are sensory issues around it, particularly if there is neurodivergence, potentially PDA, you know, which can then start to feel like a demand that I've got to keep eating that food. Just make it so normal. You can obviously communicate with parents, let them know that they've done well, but just try not to make a big song and dance about it. Let's keep going. This is really great. Yeah. Think about the language you use around food. So we might start to want to use language like useful, helpful, powerful, valuable, versus those kind of more loaded terms like good or bad, healthy or unhealthy. I think it's really nice in this kind of real context of where can we add the goodness. It makes sense to not only grown-ups but also children to use these words like useful, helpful, really focusing on that adding in approach. And you might start to think about food chaining. So you might make more valuable versions, nutritionally valuable versions of their favorite foods. Things like homemade burgers and wholemeal rolls, fish cakes or fish fingers, chunky oven chips with skin on. You could mix some sweet potato in there as well. Homemade coleslaw, you could use yogurt instead of mayonnaise. Homemade pizzas, make those 7 veg sauces that you can get on top. You know, it's really easy for just cooking up lots of veg with enough passata or tinned tomatoes. You can make a really veg-packed sauce that looks very, very similar. And empower children to make choice in those kind of more valuable ranges. Which of these foods, which of these useful foods or ingredients should we add in today? And really keeping that communication up as much as you possibly can, that whole family approach. So discuss the adding in approach, share healthy swap ideas. Maybe that's something you start in your newsletters, or if you have a online platform where you put information, could you start some healthy valuable recipe swaps? Create resources like early years superfoods, early years power foods, you know, things that 2-year-olds should have in their diet, how to eat a rainbow, that kind of thing. You could send home some seeds to grow. Children love eating things that they have grown, or you could do that in your setting. You could use rainbow charts and challenges. You can draw and paint with food to help reduce that disgust response and get children used to being around different foods. Encourage cooking at home. Really key, and cooking in your setting where you can, but definitely at home. Encourage parents to get children into the kitchen. Invite parents in to share food. Get them to share their food stories, you know, their stories of food from lots of different cultures around food as well. And don't forget to look after your nutrition too. If you are burning out and not feeding your body well and fueling your engine, you're not going to have the resilience, and you have a busy job. You have lots to think about, don't you? So look after your nutrition too.